there's no real appetite for a massive retaliatory attack on this retaliatory attack. I think the Americans will be urging restraint now on Israel. It's tit for tat, as we all knew. I mean, the Israeli strike on the consulate in Damascus is what sparked this off. And Iran has now more or less satisfied its honor.
Welcome to Times Radio Breakfast. It's 9:05. It's Sunday morning. It's lovely to have your company. Now, the Israeli military says more than 300 drones and missiles were launched overnight by Iran. Well, the Iranian Foreign Ministry has confirmed it carried out what it calls a series of strikes on Israeli military bases. A statement says they were in self-defense after the attack on the consulate in Damascus, which it blames on Israel. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner from the Israeli Defense Force has been speaking to us on Times Radio Breakfast this morning.
For the last 6 months, Iran has been, I would be the puppet master of everything that has been happening around us. So what happened in the early hours of this morning and throughout the course of the night was a very clear show of solidarity and strength from Israel and the partners, that are the alliance that came together from the US, the UK, France, and others, in order to send a very clear message to Iran that they can't get away with their mischief. The IDF intercepted, together with the allies, over 99%, around 99% of those munitions and death bombs that were on their way to kill Israelis, and cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, or explosive drones, they were all taken out en route.
It's Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner from the IDF. Well, let's speak now to Michael Binyon, who's a foreign affairs specialist and contributor to The Times. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Before we spoke to the IDF, there seemed like, speaking to our commentators this morning, it felt like there was some level of positivity, dare I say it, that this wouldn't be escalated, that this was kind of a win for both sides. Iran had shown to its domestic audience that it could successfully launch a strike on Israel. Israel could successfully show that they had more or less, I appreciate there is one child who's been injured, but more or less protect the nation. But the IDF very much keeping the door open for an escalation, for a further response. Just give us your assessment of how dangerous a situation you think we're in at this point this morning.
Well, it is dangerous, but of course it's less dangerous because most of in fact, virtually all those incoming missiles have been shot down. And therefore the damage and hurt and injury and pain and deaths and all that on Israel is more or less averted. And I think there's no real appetite for a massive retaliatory attack on this retaliatory attack. I think the Americans will be urging restraint now on Israel. It's tit for tat, as we all knew. I mean, the Israeli strike on the consulate in Damascus is what sparked this off. And Iran has now more or less satisfied its honor. And Iran has indicated that it will not escalate itself. It will not escalate this attack further. That's it, even though it didn't really actually achieve very much. So I think with a bit of luck, we won't get any more military operations on either side.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, as you rightly point out, the US President Joe Biden is really urging restraint at the moment. But when we look at the warnings that have come from President Biden to Prime Minister Netanyahu over Gaza that haven't really been listened to that well in recent weeks, I just wonder how much power the US now wields over Israel.
Well, of course, the fact that President Biden quickly responded very positively about an absolute ironclad commitment to Israel over the Iran attacks should reassure Netanyahu that Israel is not going to be abandoned by the US. On the other hand, as you say, Netanyahu is not in much of a mood to listen to the Americans or indeed anyone over Gaza or over calls for restraint or even a ceasefire there. And I think that pressure will continue from America. In a way, Netanyahu's off the hook for the moment because the focus has shifted to Israel's own protection from Iran. But I think the pressure will return and remain over Gaza.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Netanyahu has managed to change the narrative, hasn't he, from people, allies criticising him over his strategy in Gaza to this ironclad support, which we've heard from so many nations. There has obviously been a lot of hostility towards Netanyahu at home from Israelis who feel that they're not happy with the way he's conducting the war in Gaza. Do you think this will help him unite the people of Israel behind him?
Well, up to a point, but I think most Israelis will say, well, it was inevitable there would have been an attack from Iran. Why did Israel bomb the consulate in the first place? I mean, they took out a person who was coordinating the Hezbollah attacks in northern Israel from Hezbollah into Israel. So you can see the logic of doing it, but they would have known, and they did know, that this would inevitably have provoked a retaliation from Iran. And whether or not that was counted in and thought perhaps to be a useful way of distracting the narrative from Gaza, it's not clear.
Gosh. So what would you expect to happen now? I mean, clearly there's a meeting later on with the UN Security Council, an emergency meeting. G7 leaders are meeting now. Do you expect a lot of pressure to be placed on Netanyahu to say, do not escalate?
Probably, yes. It depends whether anything further happens on the Iranian side. I mean, if Iran makes a declaration, well, promise or whatever, that that's it. And they seem to have indicated that they've said that they have avenged their honor and that they've retaliated for the consulate destruction. If they do that, then it may be that Israel can be persuaded to leave it at that. I mean, we don't have reports of any casualties of anyone in Israel. It's extremely expensive to shoot down 300 or so drones and missiles, but I don't think expense is the major factor here.
What do you make about, for example, the Jordanians and the Saudis being involved in protecting Israel?
Well, the Israelis should be extremely grateful because the Saudis and Jordanians have shown remarkable restraint so far over Gaza. They have not broken off relations. Well, Saudi Arabia doesn't have relations, but they've not escalated things against Israel on its periphery. And the fact that they've actually more or less stood by Israel and repelled or retaliated against Iran. They haven't retaliated, but they've protected Israel to some extent. I mean, it does show that the truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran is only skin deep, really. I mean, these two really don't like each other, and the Jordanians also are extremely worried about what they see as the export of terrorism still coming from Tehran.
How worried should we be about the possibility of the UK being dragged into this? The representative from the IDF wouldn't confirm reports this morning suggesting that RAF jets had actually been involved in shooting down some of these drones and missiles. He said that was for the British government to confirm or deny, although the UK is an ally. Should we be worried about getting sucked into another conflict?
Well, that's always a worry, yes. I mean, one of the main things Britain's tried to insist on is that the Gaza operation should not become a regional conflict. And of course, to some extent, this has already happened, though the countries around, namely Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, haven't actually been drawn into the fighting. But if it does spread, then that is clearly very worrying. I think the British will be very restrained. It's more of a symbolic response rather than an actual full-scale engagement, because the drones were not over Israel, as we understand. They were shot down in international airspace, and the British, they could make a reasonable claim that they're just protecting international borders and treaties, which is a fair point. I think there would be a real resistance to Britain being cast as a sort of ally with Israel if there's a further retaliation the other way again.
Really interesting. Thank you for your analysis this morning.
Thank you.
That is Michael Binyon, who is a foreign affairs specialist. He's a contributor of the Times.